I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker for the summit, who's going to talk about the power of patient advocacy organizations like NephCure, the power that we have in bringing new treatments and funding to rare disease.
My name is Joel Wood.
Not yet. So let me introduce you first, Joel. Joel Wood is currently the Senior Vice President for Government Affairs at the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, representing the world's largest and most successful commercial insurance brokerages. But he's also the president and founder of the Foundation to Eradicate Duchenne. In 2000, Joel's then 2-year-old son, James, was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the world's #1 lethal childhood genetic disorder. At the time of James's diagnosis, there was not a single drug in the marketplace. Hardly any NIH funding was allocated to muscular dystrophy research, and there had never before been organized political advocacy in the halls of Congress for DMD. Joel and his wife Dana formed the Foundation to Eradicate Duchenne in 2001 to change that. Are you hearing any parallels in our organization's foundings and our organization's stories? So we can't wait for you to hear Joe's story and the many parallels that exist between our two organizations. So please give it up for Joel Wood. Thank you.
My name is Joel Wood. I am very frustratingly speaking to you from my home. A little bit more on that in just a second, but I am so deeply appreciative of this opportunity that Kelly and the team at NephCure have extended to me, and hopefully there are a few dots that can be connected from a advocacy standpoint, because we all know that clinical trials, scientific developments, medicines, treatments, cures are all extraordinarily expensive, and investments have to be made, and a big part of those investments come ultimately from government and from government funding. And my hope here today is that you'll be able to take away a few little nuggets that can make you all better advocates, and we can connect those dots best. Here's how I got here. I think most of you know my buddy Chris Porter. Chris is, and I know one another for longer than either of us would want to admit. My background is both Chris and I both worked on Capitol Hill. I worked for Republican member Congress and a Republican committee staff, and Chris worked for a couple of different Democrats, a couple of real interesting ones, in fact. But I've been a lobbyist in Washington for over 35 years, and my position today is that I am the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. So this is a trade organization that represents the commercial insurance brokerage industry section. Only about 200 member firms, but among those 200 member firms, more than upwards of 75% of all employer-sponsored health plans are sold through our member firms. They're not the health plans themselves. Our guys are the brokers and the consultants that help put them together, and a lot of other business insurance products. So it's given me a good perspective on the healthcare system and a lot of the flaws that are in it. And what we work to do is to preserve the employer-provided group health insurance marketplace. But that's not why I come to you today. Chris and his wife, Roz, dear friends, connected the dots with Kelly. Kelly's daughter is Macy, whom she loves very much, and Chris and Roz's daughter is Macy as well. And so this is just a great honor. And again, I know, though, I always have some great jokes to tell, but they're never going to work on a video. I am a human encyclopedia of congressional sex scandals, for example, and I'm just not going to have that opportunity it just won't come off the same way. And I think we've all had, in the era of Zoom, we've all had our moments. And for me, one of my big moments was as lobbyist for the commercial insurance industry, was about 6 weeks into lockdown. One of my member firms out at West said, "Look, Joel, we're going to call together about 2,000 of our clients. We want you to describe what is Congress doing to respond to this, and we're going to talk about coverage limits." Well, I knew this was going to be 2,000 very unhappy people because these were going to be clients who had just learned that their business interruption policies did not cover, had an exemption for pandemics. And so I'm just going to get on. They put this thing together really quickly. They just want 5 minutes from me, but they didn't have a moderator on the comments that were popping up. And no sooner did I open my mouth than somebody had his name attached to it actually said for all to see, so who is this ass clown in Washington, D.C. who is talking to us right now? So, you get us. We've all had our moments, and hopefully I won't have any particular moments at this particular thing. Let me tell you. So here's the reason why I'm not with you. Clumsily, after a political fundraising luncheon week before last, I was waiting for my Uber, and then as the Uber pulled up, I decided to look at my phone as opposed to looking at where my foot was going off the curb. And so that's my surgeon, and this is why I am not with you with my Mickey ears on at the Swan and the Dolphin, and I apologize to you for this. Here's the connection. This is my son, James. James, this was taken 4 or 5 years ago. James is 24, almost 25 years old. At the age of 2, James was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This is a genetic disease, a rare disease. So I think there's a lot of commonality. I'll talk about the things that I think are common in our mission and some of the things that are not so common. And hopefully we can derive from that, some good, thoughtful action pieces that are going to make a difference for you, for your families. So when James was diagnosed, this is a genetic disease, Duchenne. It is the world's #1 lethal childhood genetic disease of worldwide. It's but still a rare disorder. 1 out of 3,500 boys. It's a genetic disease, but in our case, as in most cases, it is not a hereditary disorder. See, we got a little bit of the celebrity stuff, the Bon Jovi thing, back when he was a little more, when James was a little more fat-faced on the steroids at the time. But the dystrophin gene it creates a protein in the body which helps bind muscle cell walls together, and he doesn't have, and it's the longest gene in the body times 10. And so there's just more things that can spontaneously go bust on it. And so we had no family history. There was no way to foretell that this was going to happen to us. Sometimes mothers are unknowing carriers, but this is, very distinct from what you guys do. As I said, there are things that are similar to us. NEFCure and the year that James was diagnosed in 2000 were the years that we started on this quest together. For me as a lobbyist, the first question that I asked was, so who's my lobbyist? I know I had been very well aware as somebody who'd spent decades in Washington working on and off Capitol Hill and trying to influence lawmakers that there were a lot of real badass professional disease organizations that had had a lot of success over the years. I wanted to know who was mine. And the problem that I had was the answer wasn't that we had a bad one. It was that we didn't have anyone, that there was no professional advocacy for this disease, which is extraordinary. And so very little was known at the time. And there was, post this, and we'll talk about this, there has been a surge in trials and standardization of trials. But at the time that my son was diagnosed, there was literally no private investment from a biotech or a pharma company in Duchenne. There was a smattering of academic research, a few things, very little. And the reality that faced me in 2000, and I think based on my long conversations with Kelly, is that I think both sets of these disorders have been screwed. There are 4 pillars for how NIH is supposed to fund research. Congress basically, for all kinds of the right reasons, they don't want to make, they don't want scientific decisions being made because of political intervention. On the other hand, this means that NIH, which is, we should all be grateful as Americans that we spend more money on basic scientific research than virtually all the other nations put together, and through NIH, and wonderful different institutions there that do extraordinary things, and those wind up getting leveraged against private investment, and so many hundreds of treatments and cures that have been solely because of NIH. That being said, though, my understanding has always been that the NIH viewpoint of how they fund things is based on 4 pillars, which is prevalence of a disease, need for, just in terms of how expensive everything is, prevalence, severity, need, and scientific opportunity. So, when it comes to my Duchenne world, prevalence, world's #1 lethal childhood genetic disease, even though that's 1 out of 3,500. Severity of the disease, uniformly fatal. And that is a distinction between the kidney-related rare disorders that you guys are interested in, but uniformly fatal. And the life expectancy at the time that my son was diagnosed at the age of 2, more than 80% of the kids did not make it to the age of 20 at that time. There was really no treatments whatsoever that were in the marketplace then. Need, very expensive disorders for the families, and desperate needs there. And then scientific opportunity for us, it was readily identifiable flaws on a single gene. We're at the forefront of potential gene therapy. That's different than you guys. On the other hand, when as I read through all the materials and go through your websites about all the disorders that you guys care about, there's extraordinary spillover effect for broader kidney disorders in general. So if you can tackle the tougher ones, these rare disorders, the spillover effect is magnificent. So when I look at those 4 pillars and what kind of funding you guys have been getting and what kind of historic funding my disease group has been getting, sorry, I use the word, I think that we've been screwed. And that's in part because of the success of some of the major disease organizations through the years. Honestly, my background as a lobbyist who works both sides of the aisle is always trying to stay, positive, friendly, but I had to use a little bit of the ACT UP model of AIDS lobbying to really try to advance things, because we had just never had anybody who was there. And all of the institutions, the 27, 28 different institutes of NIH had been set up through the years, and Congress would allocate big picture numbers to each of these institutes, the Cancer Institute, Heart, Blood, Lung, all of the ones, the infectious disease run by Dr. Fauci, through political intervention. And these disease groups had been really successful. And so the fact that I didn't get started until the year 2000, and you guys didn't really get started until the year 2000, we've had a lot of ground to make up. And so let's talk about some of the stuff that we did, and hopefully that can be helpful to you guys as well. I'm going to jump ahead real quick. So my attitude when my kid is diagnosed, and there's no one that's lobbying for this, and I have no background. I barely escaped the University of Mississippi with a liberal arts degree, from which my daughter is graduating next week. So I just was going to sling as much crap up against the wall as I possibly could. And I would urge you guys to sort of use that approach as well, constructively, in a friendly way, but do an assessment of who has connections, who has any kind of a political connection or a neighbor's political connection, or has had friends or family that has suffered from rare kidney disorders that can have an understanding. And don't, yes, certainly not all members of Congress are equal. Some of them are on the key committees of jurisdiction that have more influence and more say. But the guy on the left there, that's Senator Roger Wicker. He's my best friend in the United States Senate, and my daughter's going to work for him after she graduates in a couple of weeks. And so he's my hometown congressman from Tupelo, Mississippi. So I go to him, and he decides, you know what, Joel, you're my friend. I need a cause. I've been helping out some other folks. He was an appropriator. Yes. What do you want? What do you need? threw a bunch of crap up against the wall with 40 or 50 members of Congress that I knew pretty well, and Roger grabbed it. And most everybody tried to be helpful. Everybody was very sympathetic. The other thing that I learned when I've started trying to figure out, all right, what am I going to do? Who has ever done anything in Congress for Duchenne muscular dystrophy? And here I am, a relatively conservative Republican from Mississippi, trying to get along with everybody, but I learned that the only member of Congress who'd ever done anything, sent a letter to NIH, was the late great Senator Paul Wellstone from Minnesota. I'd done everything I could to defeat Paul Wellstone as an insurance lobbyist. He defeated an incumbent that I had strongly supported. Paul Wellstone was to the left of Ted Kennedy. He was the Bernie Sanders before Bernie Sanders was in the Senate. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the king of lost causes is the only guy that I've got. So, and it turned out that there was one mom in Bemidji, Minnesota, who was the wife of a rice farmer. And she had a son with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and she was working the phones. And she found him, and he was sympathetic, and now there was nothing sophisticated about it. But what we did was we wound up pairing these two. Roger Wicker was then in the House of Representatives. He's now in the Senate, and he is set to be chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee if Republicans retake control of that chamber this fall. That's a big if. And Wellstone was a liberal member of the Senate, and not on any particular committee of major jurisdiction on any of this. But we paired those two up, and everybody told us that you're never going to get a disease-specific bill. They'd say, go out there, put your bill out there, get a bunch of co-sponsors, and at some point you can, there'll be some other stuff that's going to move. We'll talk about that. That may be 21st century cures. And then maybe you can morph some provisions into it. So on the day that Roger Wicker took that bill down to the floor to seek co-sponsors, I called everybody that I knew. And so Wicker comes back after he dropped the bill in the hopper, and his staffer says, hey, Congressman, you got 41 co-sponsors. He's like, no kidding. I got 41 co-sponsors already. Well, it was a long day on the House floor. So he just decided, I'm going to go down, try to save kids with muscular dystrophy. I'm going to introduce myself to members of Congress I don't even know. At the end of that first day, we had 91 co-sponsors. Now, look, I'm blessed to be in a profession that affords me opportunities to interact and to know a lot of members of Congress and to be able to do this. Well, everybody told us you're never going to get a standalone disease-specific bill, and it took us about a year to get it done, but we did get it done. It's the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act, Community Assistance Research and Education Act, and its enactment has meant hundreds of millions of dollars that we've gotten in NIH funding. I still would regard our cup as half empty as opposed to half full, but we've made a lot of progress. And I think to a certain extent, you guys are influenced by all of these organizations as well. Just even from a Social Security disability standpoint, we have concerns. But my political interventions have been mostly on just the NIH front through our authorization legislation. Our problem, this is different than yours. Our problem was we didn't have a natural home, and you had different institutes that were basically pointing the fingers at one another. The neurologists diagnosed Duchenne, so we were in the Neurology Institute, but they said, no, you guys really should be in the National Institute of Musculoskeletal and Skin Disease, which is a tiny little institute relative to the big ones, relative to neurology, cancer, heart, blood, lung, those. And then we had like 4 different institutes and really low level people that were working on this stuff and no coordination. And so we've subsequently then gone and chased money in other places. We used to have the earmark era, which has kind of come back under the Democrats. And we got, for example, I just got a couple of $1 million for an equipment grant from one of our leading institutions. We had 2 great United States senators that were willing to put their names on a $2 million equipment grant that is going to support our efforts in Duchenne at one of our leading institutions. So you can see here's where we were in 2001, under $5 million. What a joke. I told Kelly I wasn't going to cuss during this thing, but that is really, it's terrible when you consider what our disease is. And so, yeah, but this should really be much steeper climb as a relative matter to the important stuff. What it has, we had hundreds of millions of additional dollars, the coordination between the institutes, and creating a lot better understanding of the sort of incidence and prevalence and the care and services that are being delivered to patients over their lifespan. And so, the average, as this does note, actually, this is an older slide I pulled out. We don't really know what the life expectancy has been expanded to by now. My son is almost 25. He's not ventilated. Ventilation technology has meant that kids have been living a lot longer than they otherwise would have lived. It really is a big thing having to do with corticosteroids. I think I view, again, similarities between us. The big development in the last 100 years was in your world was dialysis. And not much in that has changed over 70 years in at least one of the papers that I read. And there were two big developments in our space from which not much really, was chased in the aftermath of it. One was just the discovery of the single gene defect disorder itself. And so scientists had long believed that this protein was going to be created by one gene. And then Dr. Eric Hoffman at Harvard was the first scientist to identify it and to clone it in 1986. And there actually had been a lot of federal spending on this is a single gene defect disorder like cystic fibrosis, like sickle cell anemia, like Tay-Sachs syndrome, like a number of single gene defect disorders. And so the money went up, and then they discovered the gene and they cloned it, and then kerpoof, all the money went away. You would have thought that would have fueled, like a rocket ship, the gene therapies. That just didn't happen. The other is scientists over the last 25 years have been understanding the implications of corticosteroids. I think that impacts your disease group as well. My kid has been on daily prednisone and now a different form called deflazacort since the day he was diagnosed at the age of 2. And you pay, one of the reasons why he looks so young is because you pay a dear price. It's a deal with the devil when you're dealing with prednisone in that its anti-inflammatory impact is very clear. Cortisol essentially was the first corticosteroid. Nobel Prize was won on that back in the early 1950s. And prednisone is a nickel a pill today. And scientists still have never really unlocked what is the anti-inflammatory impact in that so that they could multiply that anti-inflammatory impact while minimizing all these terrible side effects. We've lost track of how many bones my son has broken. I have to look to him for inspiration on the bone front in the last 2 weeks or so because he's had to put up with so much. And so, that is extending life expectancy, but, gosh knows, just having the dialysis development without, the infrastructure of massive infusions and cooperation, coordination, clinical trials with great firms like Travere and other biopharma firms. We've got to fuel that with more federal interventions. One of the things that I've recommended at some point, you guys, need to start eyeballing is trying to get dollars through. It's a long story. I'll spare you, but basically Congress expends $35 billion a year on basic scientific research through NIH. They spend a little over $1 billion additionally through the Defense Department, through Fort Detrick and the Office of Congressionally Directed Medical Research programs. And these are dollars where Congress people specifically put these numbers in. It used to be that they would direct them to to specific institutions. And I was able to do that for a number of years. And now, we just get $10 million a year through this, but they bring a military mindset to it. And this is where it's difficult to sort of get on the list. And you've got to make your rationale for why the Defense Department would be interested in it. In our case, the Pentagon cares a lot about muscle injury and repair. And the Pentagon spends a whole lot of money on basic scientific research on robotics that we're also very interested in. So it's been great. They bring a military mindset to it. They're very much about translation. They're very much about leverage with other organizations. And so I really urge you to keep an eye on that. You can see my funding on that's been kind of weird, but I feel confident we'll hang in there at 10, trying to move that number up to about 12 million this year. But it's good money. And, it's just establishing the right connection. This is where looking at those lists of who are members of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee, and in particular, the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee in both chambers, making some friendships there and getting your foot in the door with them. And as I noted, they just really are. They're all about the outcome measures. And for us, gene therapy ultimately is going to be the cure for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. But as much as we hear about these CRISPR technologies and all the exciting developments on gene therapy, it's still pretty tough. I mean, that landscape is difficult for us because we're the largest gene in the body times 10. You've got to be able to implant that genetic fix inside a virus that invades the entire body's cellular structure without the immune system overwhelming it or being overwhelmed by it. And so we still got a little ways to go on that. There's some thrilling trials of some young kids who are getting the gene therapy, and they're producing dystrophin. In the history of mankind, nobody with Duchenne has ever been able to produce the protein itself. And these kids are producing it, but there are big question marks about now, will they be able to continue to administer this as to whether or not there will be some sort of an immune response to it. A lot of questions yet to be answered on that front. So, and then what happens is, we've got this congressional act. I hope it someday. I know that you guys are shopping around some language, and I want to work with you guys to help identify potential champions and then run with it and building those kind of relationships. But additionally, Congress does, they don't tell, this is an authorization legislation. It is not a direct appropriation like my Defense Department thing. And so we can sort of push them along through report language and some other things that can be done just to sort of turn up the heat, turn up the pressure, because the NIH guys, as much as they like to be isolated from political intervention, they do respond to it. And I think it's important for you guys to be engaged in getting the kind of report language. And we're already in the throes of FY23 negotiations. It may be one of the few things in this toxic environment that we're in on Capitol Hill right now, where there may be good bipartisan cooperation. It ultimately worked out. The FY22 funding worked out harmoniously between both parties. Whenever good stuff happens in Washington, you don't hear about it. You only hear about the bad stuff. But we have to go after this. And so I know that Kelly, you guys all have, you have a great advocacy program and engagement. And I know that you guys have a great landscape analysis and have some already doing some good work on getting grassroots and grass tops in terms of congressional targets as to who you need to be to get to be your champions for you. The advocacy does, this, I can't tell you how many times I have had, right now I'm going through my CDMRP, the Defense Department things. And we did one day, week before last, I did 19 Zoom calls in one day, all 15 minutes or so. And I can't tell you how many sort of blank looks you get from congressional staff, and they're hearing it from all of these organized disease communities. Forgive me, I got dogs fighting on food behind me, and this was going so well. But it's, you do have to link it to a broader picture and for the rare disease community more broadly as well. I throw this picture in, but it's to me, and I know that Chris would agree with me on this, that it is Yeah, you go to take poli sci 101. This is how a bill becomes law. And this is how the Kennedy School of Government would teach, all and people that are, parliamentarians that could give you 10,000 nuances on how things can get done in Washington. The reality is, and especially I look at my own efforts on the disease front, and even my efforts as an insurance industry lobbyist. Um, it really is about the way that Madison just set up government. It is always much more difficult to pass something than it is to beat something. That is particularly the case with the Senate. And if anyone who has followed the Build Back Better legislation certainly knows that to be the case in the last few months with Senators Manchin and Sinema Manchin, as we call them here in D.C. And so, yeah, I mean, what you learn in Poli Sci 101 is you get somebody to introduce a bill. It gets assigned to a committee. You get co-sponsors for it, then you try to build support, then you get a markup for it, you move it through the subcommittee, you move it to the full committee, then on the House, you move it through the House of Representatives with a rule associated with it. It's pretty much the same thing happens in the Senate, except they don't have rules in the same way, and you pretty much have to have unanimous consent to get it considered without a confrontation. And then ultimately they pass in both chambers, and then the chambers work out their differences, and then they report them back and pass it again, and then it goes on for presidential signature. That's all BS. I mean, that's the way it works, yes, but it's not what any of you need to really be concerned about. DC is a town that is all about relationships. And I know most people don't want to hear this because the toxicity in the national discourse is so terrible now. And there's a lot, I could give you a half hour on what I think is wrong with it. And the fact that these guys aren't, they don't know one another. They don't live here in DC together. They don't forge the kind of relationships that they did when I came to work for a member of the Reagan Revolution Republican hopeless minority in 1983. But yet, we had great relationships across the aisle. I mean, there's a lot of things that are wrong. That being said, though, most people up here want to do the right thing. And when I go as an insurance lobbyist to try to convince someone on a committee of jurisdiction how they really need to take to my position on the non-admitted in reinsurance subtitle of the Dodd-Frank legislation and how it applies to premium tax allocations, that is not going to grab anybody by the heartstrings. All of your stories are. And this is across the philosophical spectrum. You've got to find ways to get in those doors and to get to meet those members of Congress and their key staff people. It's all about relationship building, and as I said, you always, sometimes I have to bite my tongue, but I'm not throwing blood around in the offices, and frankly, there are a lot of great deserving causes, particularly in the organized disease world. But you do have a major leg up over when you think about the thousands and thousands of interest groups. There are more than 55,000 registered lobbyists in Washington, like me and Chris Porter, and every imaginable interest group. One time I was thumbing through the Washington Representatives book, looking for somebody. It's like the Manhattan phone book, and I saw that there was a National Pickle Association. I'm like, damn, I did not know what the pickle issues were on Capitol Hill. These causes, just knowing what Kelly deals with Macy and those struggles that are so heartrending, there's so much that can be done. We're really talking about funding in the decimal dust of what the government has been spending in recent years. I use one line that all of my conservative execs really love, that if time were money, and because we've been talking in the trillions of dollars that have been spent, the American Rescue Plan was $1.9 trillion last year. If time were money and you got $1 for every second that went by, it would take you 11 days to become a millionaire. it would take you 31.7 years to become a billionaire at $1 per second. And it would take you 31,700 years to become a trillionaire. So we're talking in the decimal dust. It's the right thing. Your professionals are going to help connect the dots and determine what it is that you need, what are the problems that you need to resolve at the regulatory agencies, be it FDA, be it NIH, be it at CMS. They're going to figure out what that is. But you've got to be able to find a way. And it's not so difficult to be able to open those doors. And I'm happy to help do so whenever possible. I think also we're going to see, I'm really, really saddened to see that Congressman Fred Upton here on the right from Michigan, who was the chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and he worked with, he's a Republican, he's retiring this year. He got thrown in a district with another Republican. He just decided to hang it up. But a great member of Congress, and he's worked with Congresswoman Diana DeGette of Denver. And the two of them really muscled their way into the 21st Century Cures Act. They had a lot of provisions that did impact orphan diseases, rare disease community, and patient outcome measurements, and did help move things along and provided a lot of additional resources. They've got the upgraded next version of 21st Century Cures, and that's going to afford a lot of interest groups an opportunity to be able to get some language, whether it's just a few paragraphs or whether it's, an entire section that might be of help. I'm not aware enough of what it is your explicit needs are going to be able to tell you which one, what explicitly you guys should be getting, but I think that it's something that is that does have an opportunity for you. This is just our little checklist of the things that we've been able to do in our disease world, and I feel good about it. Success has 1,000 fathers, and defeat is an orphan, is the old line, and I know that I feel as frustrated for the things that I've been unable to do as I am grateful for the things that we have been able to do. On the other hand, when my kid was diagnosed at 2, I didn't expect to have him. And he's not the world's greatest student, but he's a 24-year-old sophomore at Radford University, going to frat parties and has a 3.7% GPA. I never thought it was his third and final chance at independent college living, and he seems to really be loving it, and he loves his independence, and the fact that we've got him and got him, I think, for a good long while. And we got a lot of stuff though that's in our pipeline. As I said at the outset, we had nothing in terms of clinical trials. We've got over 40, almost a comparable number to what I've seen in your community. We've got over 40 clinical trials. We've had 5 actually. 2 are just variations of one another. 5 drugs that have been approved by the FDA that are explicitly for Duchenne. Now, these are not blockbuster cures, but they're solid base hits. And one of the things that I'm hopeful will actually have some implications for your disease community that's coming out, that we get early funding through the DOD and through my foundation that raises, not much, about $1 million a year, and is that drug, as I said, we think we may have helped unlock the secrets of corticosteroids, and a drug called vamorolone that I'm highly confident is going to be approved by the FDA next, probably first or second quarter of next year. All the trials are done. All of the results are absolutely pristine. And it's a drug that will magnify the anti-inflammatory impacts while minimizing side effects. And I think that could have some implications in your disease community. Again, not a doc, not a scientist, but hopefully they will have some. I know that it'll have spillover effect with a lot of other disorders. All of us have a finite amount of capital that we can devote to our families, to the fight for treatments, for trying to move the ball down the field. If we have finite amounts, with all that we're doing just to take care of ourselves and to take care of family members with rare kidney disorders, a finite amount of physical time, a finite amount of emotional ability to cope with it. I've been putting off writing my annual letter of gratitude to everyone, and it's hard to just not fall into the platitudes of just because it's heartfelt, but I hate having to write it, and it just takes a lot out of me emotionally. And in my case, and in Chris Porter's case, we also we happen to have a finite amount of political capital to expend as well. But what I'd like to try to convince you is you got that political capital as well. Um, those were like that mom in Minnesota, in Bemidji, Minnesota, who got through to Paul Wellstone, who later, I actually tooled around with Wellstone when he was running for re-election and got to introduce him at various places that I was the redneck Mississippi Republican chairing the Wellstone re-election committee. And only a few months later, he died tragically in a plane crash. But after, he worked so tirelessly, I remember I was at a big Republican fundraiser, not a big one, about 20 of us in a steakhouse with bleeding red meat and liquor flowing and glasses of red wine. And I get a call from Senator Wellstone to tell me that Trent Lott had given the go-ahead to just pass the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act unanimously in the Senate. And that finished it up, and then it was headed to then President Bush for being signed into law. And I was so excited, but I'm like, here I am, this Republican lobbyist, and what a dear, dear man. After that Muscular Dystrophy Care Act passed, he and Senator Wicker got on the phone with one another, and the two of them agreed that there were only three things on earth that they completely agreed with one another on, and that was the 10 Commandments, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act. That all got started because of that mom in Minnesota, and then just, I guess, I'm a big Rabbi Kahana guy. I think many of you have read When Bad Things Happen to Good People. You always hear these people who say, things happen for a reason. I don't buy that things happen for a reason. I'm a Book of Job guy. Job was a good man, and Job still got devastated. And and then the other things, this only happens because you have the ability to influence it. And that's, I don't necessarily buy that either. But I do know that, my wife and I, being lobbyists and connecting our dots with what this mom in Minnesota did, can happen with you guys. And it's not that hard to identify the people that you do need to talk to. As I said, the environment in Washington really sucks. I think Kelly lives just outside of Lauren Boebert's district. I don't know if she was packing heat on the House floor when she at the State of the Union. Marjorie, the guy in the middle is my buddy, Congressman Byron Donalds from Naples, Florida, and he just happened. His mug was all over the papers the next day. I only included this image just because to note that, notwithstanding this environment, there's a lot of good people that are trying to do the right things. There's a lot of stuff that happens that you'll never know about that is never going to attract the attention of the press. We need to make sure that in this world, you make your mark. My final rule that I always say in DC that I try to live by, don't always completely, but always remember this. The foot you step on today is connected to the ass that you got to kiss tomorrow. And so with that, I know an hour was allocated, but I shared with your technical person earlier that I read once where the average length of a vaudeville act was 11 minutes. It was the belief of the performers that no act could sustain interest beyond 11 minutes. So if all of those singers and comedians and dancers and guys with trained monkeys and jugglers could not sustain interest for more than 11 minutes, what on earth makes me think that I could sustain your interest for an hour? This is my James, my beloved James, my beloved Julia, who will be graduated from college next week. And as I was laying on the couch with my broken foot before they even operated on it, I took this picture of him last week. I love him much. I know how much you guys all love your families and love this cause. I hope that this is a really successful event for you. I hope that I'll get a rain check to be able to visit with you in person. Hope that some of this is able to stick with you. Just know, sling it up against the walls, do it as nicely as possible. You're going to have adult professional supervision on this, but we got to move the ball down the field. there's just too much leverage, too much at stake for all of you not to fully take advantage of this. I know you have a wonderful organization, and it's extraordinary for you all to have gone out of your way to gather here, not here, in Orlando. I hope to be with you before too long. Thank you all very, very much. You all are the best. All our love.